The next classical work motivation theory is self-determination theory, SDT. The proposition of this theory focuses on the degree to which an individual's behavior is self-motivated and self-determinated. SDT posits that there are two major types of motivator in driving employees' work behavior, namely the intrinsic motivator and extrinsic motivator. Intrinsic motivator refers to the behavior that is performed for its own sake. So they are initiated from the interest instead of having some external factors in driving them to do the performance. There is no apparent reward that is received except the activities itself. It means that the employees, they really like it, they have the interest in doing that, instead of having some external forces in driving their behavior. In contrast, extrinsic motivators refers to the behavior that is performed to acquire material or social reward or to avoid punishment. Because there are some external factors, including the reward or some punishment, in order to drive them to do the work behavior. So this type of the behavior, this type of the motivation is short-lasting and only perceived as long as the reward is provided. Because of these external factors, and so employees will do the behavior. If no longer have the external factor, employees are not willing to continue those behavior. And here is one of the examples to differentiate the extrinsic as well as the intrinsic motivation according to SDT. Two boys, they are playing football, and so, well, for someone, the boy who has the extrinsic motivators will have the motivation to perform an activities to earn a reward or avoid punishment because he wants to get an award. He wants to be the champion in the football match because of these external factors. So that's why they have the motivation to play it. However, for someone who has the intrinsic motivator, is the one who is motivated to perform an activity for his own sake and personal reward. Maybe because he likes playing football, he has the great interest and passions to play football. He thinks he feels the sense of the achievement in playing football. So they are the internal drive in driving them, in motivating them to play football. So there is the differentiation between extrinsic and intrinsic motivation in this example. Here are the examples of intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation in the workplace. For the intrinsic motivator, because of the interest and enjoyment in the task itself, the example including like enjoyment, purpose, growth, curiosity, passion, self-expression, and fun. Someone who have the high level of the enjoyment and high degree of the curiosity or high passionate in doing the activities, and so it's intrinsically motivating them to perform the behavior. So they are the intrinsic motivator. In contrast, extrinsic motivator because of the outcome that will result by doing the task, such as promotion, pay raise, bonus, benefits, prize, peace, and winning, etc. Because the individuals would like to get this external reward. That's why they will perform the task. Those we call it as the extrinsic motivation. The next question is, does extrinsic motivation relate to work performance? How do incentives relate to performance? Yes or no? This is a very interesting video to show you the surprising science of motivation. Perhaps from this video will give you some important insight to this question. Empirical evidence shows that intrinsic motivation leads to positive outcomes, such as creativity, positive well-being, and performance. Research also shows that extrinsic motivation leads to people taking shortcuts, although it may also increase the work performance, but probably it finds the quickest way to meet the performance goal, even if it is not the best, but still is positively related to work performance. But we also need to be cautious that for having the extrinsic motivator, it may also have the possibility to lead to unethical behavior, because people would like to get a high performance in order to obtain the reward, the external motivation. So in this case, it is also likely that people will perform some unethical behavior in order to enhance their performance. The implication of the self-determination theory posits that organizations need to consider the way on how they can increase level of intrinsic motivation. SDT suggests that people have some basic needs, for example, like the needs for the relatedness, autonomy, and competence. People would like to have a better relationship with the others, would like to have the needs to control over the resources and power, and they will also have the sense of achievement to demonstrating that the talent and being valued in the team. The more a job meets these needs, the more intrinsically motivating we will find it. If the job itself can allow the employees to build a better relationship with the others, can control over the resources, higher level of the autonomy, and can make good use of and demonstrate their competence, will also help to intrinsically motivate the employees to work harder. Einstein also says that if people are good only because they fear punishment and hope for reward, then we are a sorry lot indeed. From this quote, we can see that it is very important to have the job that is intrinsically motivated. Meaningful jobs are more motivating. If people are only concerned about extrinsic motivation, and their work performance will not be high in the long run. Next, I would like to introduce to you the job characteristic model. This is also one of the very famous and classical work motivation model. To persist that the intrinsic motivation is divided from the job itself is so important in driving employees' work motivation. In this theory, it says that there are three critical psychological states, including whether the employees they feel they have the responsibility in doing the job, whether they know the result of the job performance, and whether they feel that their job is so meaningful or not. The job characteristic model posits that if the job itself consists of the 5 major job elements, the job characteristic, and then we're increasing the positive psychological states so as to increase the overall outcome, positive outcome. So the model says that the 5 elements, including the skills variety, it means that to what extent that the job itself require different types of the skills to work on. For example, like if some of the job, including the skills require the employees to have the leadership skills, communication skills, technical skills, or conceptual strategic management skills in order to perform. And so this is the high level of skill variety. For some of the other occupation, The jobs like the mass production line workers, probably they do not necessarily need to have different kinds of skills. They just need to work harder to produce the product. They don't need to interact with others, so they're not necessary to have the communication skills or the leadership skills, etc. So in this type of the case, we call it as having a low level of skills variety. The second element is task identity. Task identities, it means that whether the employees, they have to complete the task from the beginning to the end of the product or the service. Say, for example, like if the employees, they are just responsible for a part of the job instead of having the whole process involving into the whole process of the production or the service provision. So in this case, the task identity will be low. The third element is task significance. So to what extent whether the task itself is very important, having the significant contribution to the organization. If it is, and so we will say that we have a high level of task significance. It means that the contribution is significant and important to the organization. If the job itself, including the high level of skills variety, high level of task identity, and high level of task significance, and we found that will highly related to experience meaningfulness of the job. So the employees will feel that their job is very meaningful. The fourth element is autonomy. To what extent that the employees can control over the resources and arrange the job, have the autonomy. If there is a high level of autonomy, so the employees will feel that they have a high level of responsibility for the work outcome. The last element is feedback. To what extent that the employees can receive the feedback in regard of their work performance. In some of the organizations or some leaders, periodically they will provide the feedback to the employees, so the employees will know how well or how bad they perform. If it is the case, and so well, the employees will have the knowledge of the result of the work. This model says that if the employees will have the higher level of experience, meaningfulness of job, if they feel that their job is very meaningful, if they have a high level of their responsibility for the job, and if they know about the result of the work, and so it will help them to enhance their work motivation, increase their work performance, and to enhance their job satisfaction. So this theories tells us that if the job itself include those 5 job characteristic elements, it will help them and positively related to their work motivation outcome. In a more contemporary job characteristic model, we found that there are some additional job characteristic elements may be related and relevant to the contemporary work, as the work itself has already been changed. Today's employees are usually the knowledgeable workers. They are not only the lower level of the manufacturing workers. And so, well, they may have a more needs on fulfilling their job in terms of the job characteristic design. Number one, in this research, they found that if the job itself will have the opportunity to acquire new, especially transferable skills, it will help the employees to feel more highly work motivated. And the job itself, if they can also managing different roles within the task, and so the employees were taking different roles. For example, like, well, in teams, they were taking the team leader's role, and they will also have the liaisons with other teams, and also, well, to represent the company. If they're taking many different multiple roles within the job and will also highly motivating them to work harder. Today's employees will also concerned about their work-life balance. They are not only the machine to work and work overtime. Instead, they will also take consideration about the work-life balance. And next is the cognitive characteristic of the work, whether the work itself has been designed to make use of the problem-solving skills. And so people would like to take challenge in certain extents. And so we make the job itself more interesting and meaningful. Emotional demands, or whether the job itself require the employees to have some emotions involvement. Consider about to not only they're the machine instead of really taking them as a person and taking into the consideration about their well-being, and so it also helps to enhance the work motivation. It's not only they will help in to finish the production, to finish the service provision, but also involving some emotional demand will make the job itself more interesting. Lastly, is the group level work characteristic, whether the employees, the team member, will have a high level of interdependency. Because we all need to have some social needs, we like to work with people happily. And so, today's employees, they also would like to seek for some opportunity to have the highly interdependency among the team members, so that the team members themselves, just like the family members, they work hand in hand together to achieve the organizational and team goals. In practice, there are lots of good examples to imply the job characteristic work design. Google is one of the significant and successful company in applying the job characteristic model. They are using 20% of the time, the free time given for the employees to develop some new product. During this time, employees are not necessary to do their routine job. Instead, they can use this free time to think of and develop some new product. And we found that half of the new product from this company are produced from this time, 20% of the free time, such as Gmail. On surface, it seems that giving 20% of the free time for the employees is not good and very costly to the company. But this 20% time is especially important if the company is taking a more innovative way of management, because employees will have more authority and they have more free times to develop some new products. And so they feel that their job itself is very meaningful. And they're also taking the responsibility on doing that. So that's why you can see that the employees are highly motivated and having a high level of work performance. The next is equity theory. People like to make a comparison with the others. And so individuals would like to seek fairness at work. And that's why people are motivated to work when they perceive fairness or unfairness in comparison to the other people. So the key is having a balance of input and output. Indeed, people like to make comparisons not only at work, but also in our everyday life. When we were very young at home, we also make the comparison of parents' treatment on you as well as on your sibling. And we will feel unfair if your parents treat your sister or brothers better than you. So again, it's kind of the fairness. At school, we also make the comparison and see whether teachers will also treat you as well as your classmate in a fair manner. So Equity theory is quite important not only at work but everywhere. This is a very interesting video to let us know the reaction of the two monkeys were paid unequally. So, well, you should take some time to watch this interesting videos and to see what people and what animals feel when they feel there is an unfairness treatment on them. The implication of the equity theory. Inequity can lead to positive outcome in the case of overpayment. If we pay more to someone and well, we were assuming that they will work harder. But people don't always change their behavior. Sometimes they can also distort their input and output or change comparison. In the long run, if the organization overpaid employees, they were assuming that in the long run, they were assuming that probably, well, this is what they are deserved. And so they would not consider that they are being overpaid. And so it cannot become their work motivator anymore. Besides that, it is also quite important in having a fairness in the reward. And we have to make sure that employees will perceive that you and for the organization compensate them in a more fair manner. And it is also quite important to increase the visibility of the procedures. People will make the comparison. And so if we are doing it in a more confidential way or well, secrecy, and so can usually lead to more rumors and also misinformation. And people will not welcome for unknown information. So that's why, well, we always need to give the reward in a more visible way. A related approach is organizational justice theory. It tells us that the way on how organization will pay the employees in a more fair manner. And this theory actually originates from the equity theory. They share the same logic and only recognize three forms of the justice. Number one is the distributive justice. For example, like it says that do people believe they have received fair reward for the contribution, and is the allocation of rewards fair? The important issue here is to what extent that people receive the same amount of their outcome. So distributive justice. The second one is procedural justice. It refers to the procedures, whether they're fair or not, when they are using it to allocate the resources to the employees. So procedural justice. Lastly is the interpersonal justice. It refers to the degree to which people are treated with politeness, dignity, and respect. And whether the employees feel that the decision makers, the leaders, will respect them, and whether they treat with the politeness. And so, well, this is what we call the interpersonal justice. I climbed to the research, and well, we found that if the organization justice level is high and will produce a lot of the positive outcome. And here is some questions to differentiate the three types of the justice. Number one, if the employees feel that I did not get the pay raised I deserved. The reason behind why I was overlooked were unclear, and my boss was not supportive or fair in his decision. So what does that mean? To what extent that the employees will feel unhappy? And why did they feel unhappy? For the first example is, I did not get the pay raise I deserve. And so in this one, And well, we can see that it's about, well, the distributive justice, the outcome justice, because talking about the outcome itself, why I did not get the pay increased I deserve. The second one is the employees to see whether they have a clear procedure in allocating the resources. So that's why they have the question in their mind. The reasons behind why I was overlooked were unclear. So the reason and for the procedures that they allocate the resources. And lastly, they feel that the interpersonal justice level is low because they have the perception that their boss was not supportive or fair in his decision making. If they have this perception, and well, they will conclude that this is not a fair organization. If they have this conclusion, and so lots of the negative outcomes follows. For example, like they will decrease their work performance, they will decrease their extra role performance, organization citizenship behavior, and they will decrease their proactive behavior, they will increase their turnover, and they will also increase their burnout, etc. So a lot of the negative reaction follows. Equity theory focuses on the distributive justice mainly, the fairness regarding the outcome like reward and pay. So the organization justice theory suggests that it is not enough, as long as if the employees are being motivated and increase their work performance, organizations also need to pay attention to the procedural aspect as well as the interpersonal aspect of the justice. They need to tell the employees that the procedures in allocating the resources in a more fair manner and all the employees are treated in a fair manner and so will and respect their contribution. So it is quite important, extremely important to increase their work motivation. And organizations' employee involvement are particularly important if given a chance the employees to involved in the decision making will help them to increase the perception of the organizational justice. There are some of the support from the research findings to confirm that high level of the perceived organizational justice will lead to the high performance and citizenship behavior, low level of the counterproductive behavior, especially in the meta-analysis of the 183 studies. And so to show us that consistently shows us that fairness is very important in driving the work motivation of the employees. In their research, they also confirmed that perceived inequity is highly stressful and not good. And so it will create a loss of the negative outcome in the organization because people always like to make comparisons with others. So that's why it is very important to seek the justice perception, to stand for the justice equity perception of the employees. Last but not the least, for the classical theory of work motivation is goal-setting theory. Goal-setting theory, goals are the target that the person is going to attain. Everyone will have goals. People are motivated to work by the goals that they set about their performance. The goal-setting theory persists that more difficult goals can lead to a high level of job performance, but only if the employees are committed to these goals. If the goal itself is achievable, and so it will motivate the employees to work harder. However, if the goal is too challenging, and then what the employees will feel that is impossible to attain it, if it is the case, cannot motivate them to work harder. If the goal itself is not challenging enough, the employees will feel that it's too easy to obtain, and so again, it cannot motivate the employees. Second, we also could consider that goals should be specific, because the more specific the goal, the more concentrated the person's effort and more directed to the employee's behavior. And so the goals should be clear and specific. Employees know what are their directions. Number three, it is important for the person to receive the feedback about their task performance. Periodically, the leaders, the organization need to give some feedback on the task performance to the employees so that to let the employees know how well or how bad that they do in order to set up the next goal. Last but not the least is precipitation. The key issue for the goal-setting theory is to allow the employee to participate in the goal setting. Because if they have the chance to participate in the goal setting, they set up their goals, and so they will be more committed to achieving the goal. If the goal itself is given by the leaders or the organization, people are less likely to be committed to attaining the goal. So in short, the application of the goal-setting theory is SMART. S, the goal should be more specific. M, measurable with numbers, because periodically we have to provide some feedback to them. We have to measure the performance. A, attainable. It should be challenging, but attainable. R, results-oriented. We have to tell them about the result for the goal. T, time bounded. We also need to give them the time point and, well, when should they achieve the goal? There are some advantages of using goal setting theory. The number one is there is substantial empirical support for the basic principle for this theory. But please bear in mind that the support mainly from the student sample. And so we still need to have a more field sample to support this idea. And this theory is also very practical in the sense that 79% of the British organization use some form of goal setting. But there are still some questions unanswered. For example, like how do we cope with multiple goals? Are there any individual differences in goal motivation? In the reality, we also need to consider that people may have multiple goals, and each goal will have different levels. So that's why we also need to think about how should people cope with multiple goals. There are still some drawbacks, some dark side to goal setting theory. Goals may encourage people to use unethical methods to achieve them, because remember that they focus attention on achievement rather than process for goal-setting theory. So people will do some unethical things in order to obtain and achieve the goals. So as the organization leader, we also need to bear in mind that we cannot only focusing on achievement. Instead, we also need to take consideration about the process of attaining the goals. So the summary so far here, the hierarchical of needs theory, the main drive for the motivation and work performance are intrinsic motivation. Those are the unfulfilled needs. For those unsatisfied needs cannot become motivator. For SDT theory, it says that we also need to consider both intrinsic as well as the extrinsic motivation. Equity theory, we have to stand for the fairness in the input and output, especially when people compare among each others. Lastly is the goal-setting theory. The goals about our performance. The goals should be specific and will consist of the SMART elements, the 5 elements to set up the goals. The next, I would like you to choose one theory and to describe how can you use the theory to help you become more motivated for your university study. And consider that you are a manager of a team. How can the theory help you motivate your team members? So please work on this task yourself and think about what theory can explain your thought.